Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about that apotheosis of Elizabethan consort music, John Dowland's Lachrimae. Now, it's not quite Elizabethan because John Dowland was lutenist to the King of Denmark, and he published the piece in London in 1604, which was 1 year after Queen Elizabeth died. Probably the piece served as sort of a job resume. He was looking for work in England, which he didn't get, and he published this piece to show sort of what he could do. But what is Lachrimae? It's really a very interesting question. It's a dance collection, as most instrumental music of this period was. The full title, and I have it here, is Lachrimae, or 7 Tears, figured in 7 passionate pavans with diverse other pavans, galliards, and allemands, set forth for the lute, viols, or violons, which is violins. Now, what does this mean? Essentially, what you get, it's really quite the remarkable thing, is a suite of 21 different pieces, different types of dance pieces, which have titles, but it starts with the most remarkable thing, the 7 passionate pavans. They're all based on Dowland's earlier song, Flow My Tears, hence Lachrimae, which of course means tears. And the 7 passionate pavans form a theme and variations, essentially. It's a variation set, and quite a remarkable one, and really the first of its kind, all based on Flow My Tears. And they have Latin titles, and the Latin titles are Lachrimae Antiquae, that's the old or original Lachrimae, which is a pretty straight transcription of the original song, and then the Lachrimae Antiquae Novae, the old Lachrimae renewed or revisited, and then Lachrimae Gementes, sighing tears, Lachrimae Tristis, sad tears, Lachrimae Coactae, this is crocodile tears, and it's a parody of sad tears, basically. It's really quite clever and lots of fun to listen to. And then Lachrimae Amantis, the lover's tears, and finally Lachrimae Verae, true tears. That's the opening sequence. But once you get past the opening sequence, there are, like I said, 21 numbers in all. It's 3 times 7, it's all full of numerology and whatnot. You get a bunch of pavans and galliards, and some of these are quite interesting. I mean, there's Captain Piper, his galliard. Captain Piper was a pirate. And what he's doing in there is anybody's guess. There's also the Earl of Essex galliard, which is probably a good thing that this was published after Queen Elizabeth died, because the Earl of Essex was Robert Devereux. We know about him, right? He rebelled against Queen Elizabeth. He was executed. I mean, they made movies about it, The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex, starring Bette Davis, right? And there's an opera, Roberto Devereux, by Donizetti. That's a big story, right? A big deal. Well, he had a galliard, the Earl of Essex, and it's in here. So the piece is full of music and anecdote, and it just has a richness and comprehensiveness that really makes it unique in its period. The whole thing takes about an hour to play, and it really seems to have been intended as a set, even though the order in which the pieces are presented on disc can vary considerably. Generally speaking, it's probably a good idea to do the 7 passionate pavans at the front, because it is theme and variations after all, and you should be able to hear the derivation as they're played. Dowland published these pieces. It was very interesting. I mean, they include, first of all, a lute part in tablature, because he was possibly the greatest lutenist of his age, and he had published the thing in what they call table format, which is quite marvelous. You have these large pages, and the 4 sides of the page contain the parts, basically, although they're 5-part strings, there's 5 parts, but they're all sort of done in that sort of form so that you could lay the thing flat on a table and everybody can sit around the table and they can all play their part from the same page of music. Things were generally not published in score in those days. They were published in parts, but with Lachrimae, Dowland, for some reason, wanted everyone to see what everyone else was doing. The music is contrapuntally ingenious. It's absolutely fascinating, expressive of that melancholy that seemed to be the flavor du jour in music of the Elizabethan period. And it's quite wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful, and you really should have it. Even if you don't really care about consort music, generally speaking, for viol consorts, this is a piece that really belongs in your collection. It's the iconic work for that kind of ensemble. Now, of course, Dowland offered the option of performing it with lute plus viols or violins, the newer violins, which is very, very interesting because I don't know how well you know viols. I mean, I talked about this a little bit in considering Haydn's works for the baritone, but the viol kind of sounds like a dying cow, as I said. Now, I don't really have a problem with dying cows. Some people do, I don't. And the reason is because it brings back happy memories of my childhood. The sound of cows dying, because my grandfather was a butcher. And we used to hang out at his slaughterhouse and hear the dying cows. Actually, we didn't get to see them be slaughtered. He was a little more sensitive than that. We saw them in pens mooing around. But the cool thing about dying cows is that once they're dead, if you're a little kid anyway, you get souvenirs. Here they are. You see these? Does anybody know what these are? This is a little bit of dying cow trivia that has to do with your viol concert. These are cow magnets. What, you may ask, is a cow magnet? Well, Grandpa gave these to us kids when we were young, and I've saved them all these years. When cows are hanging out in their pasture, they eat everything. I mean, they don't have sort of an upper palate. They don't taste things or feel what they're eating, and they can very easily eat little bits of metal or barbed wire or fencing or stuff that you make farm materials out of, and this in turn can pierce their stomach and cause death or infection or other nasty things, and it messes up your tripe. So if you like your tripe, you don't want to be munching on a piece of rusty barbed wire or a nail or something like that. So what do? They stuff a magnet down the mouth of the calf, when it's still a calf, or a veal, as we used to call it back in the day. You stuff a magnet down the veal, and it collects all of the bits of metal in the cow's stomach. Then when the cow's slaughtered, you get your magnet back and you hose it down and you can reuse it or give it to your grandchildren. And they make great toys when you're a little kid. I mean, magnets are so cool. So I have very, very happy memories of dying cows. And so I am not naturally predisposed to dislike the sound of the viol. And it turns out, actually, that when you have a consort of viols, they don't sound so bad. I mean, when you have a bunch of dying cows, they can sound kind of happy. They sound kind of warm and fuzzy. It's not so annoying. And of course, the fact that there's a lute in here plonking along with the dying cows means that there's a wonderful succulence of texture. I mean, you were thinking about not so much the dying cows, but the steak that comes after the dying cow, right? It gets really much better afterwards. Anyway, I have a couple samples here that I want to play you just so you get a sense. Here is the original song, Flow My Tears, as Dowland arranged it as the first of the Lachrimae pavans. Go! And then, just to give you a sense that it's not all death and droopiness. I mean, it really isn't. There's quite a bit of contrast, to the extent that viol concerts have contrast. I mean, it's not a Mahler symphony of contrast. It's more subtle contrast, but it's a contrast of rhythm and tempo. And here is the last of the Galliards. This is Mr. Nico Griffith, his Galliard. So you can see there's music of quite captivating range and variety. And now let's talk about some recordings. Let's see, which version of Lachrimae you may want to have. The truth is, this is the kind of work that specialist ensembles do, and they all do it pretty well. So which one you get kind of depends on whether or not you like to have the arrangement the way Dowland published it, or with other things added, or the approach to performance, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Anthony Rulli in the Consort of Music, of course, did one of these. It's in that big Loiselier box of complete Dowland, which I don't think exists anymore, but you may still find it. My sort of initial version that I learned the piece from was this one on Virgin Veritas with fretwork, which I still enjoy very much. It has Christopher Wilson playing the lute, and it's quite lovely. But the notes from this one are by Peter Holman of the Parley of Instruments, who did it himself on Hyperion with the Parley of Instruments. Now, the interesting thing about this performance that makes it kind of special is that he uses the violin option, not the viol option. So again, if the dying cows bother you, you can sort of avoid the dying cows by having living violins. Now, the violin version is quite different from the other ones. In the first place, he includes a few extra pieces from other Dowland manuscripts in here, because pavans were often teamed up with Galliards, but in this piece they're not necessarily, and he's since found some pairings, and he includes them here, and some other stuff from earlier versions and whatnot. It's nice to have. But the point about the violins is that in order to make the piece work properly for a violin consort, Dowland kind of divided the thing up between high pieces and low-pitched pieces, and some of the lower, droopier pieces are transposed up a fourth. So that makes the entire piece a little bit brighter. And if dying cows and melancholy are not your thing, but you still want to experience Lachrimae, then this one with the Parley of Instruments is the one to do, because relatively speaking, when you consider it's music about sighing and love, and, it's not ever going to be like a laugh riot, but it's a little brighter in that performance. Also, on the brighter side, because of the way it's performed, is Jordi Saval's on Alia Vox here. What Saval does is he does not play the piece in its original version. He teams up the pavans with Galliards. So it's like preludes and fugues. You get a slow, fast, slow, fast, slow, fast alternation. And that's one way, certainly a legitimate way to do the piece. Like I said, prefer to hear all of the pavans up front, because you get a keener sense of the variation technique that Dowland is employing. But this is a beautiful performance by Saval. It's on Alia Vox, his label, and you could certainly do worse. And again, if you think that an excess of droopiness is going to get you down, then you should definitely consider Saval. However, my favorite performance, and the one from which these excerpts were drawn, is this guy, the Dowland consort with Jakob Lindberg on Bis. First of all, the sonics are fabulous. Second of all, it's played in its regular order. And there's something just incredibly inviting and enticing about this performance. And you heard from the sound that warm fuzziness of the viols. It's really very, very nice. It's more a bunch of happy cows in their pen mooing about, the joy of being in a herd, rather than the fact that quite shortly they're going to be slaughtered. You know what I mean? It has that character. It's really just a beautiful, beautiful version. And what's more, because it's on BIS, which has a policy of not deleting anything, it's available. You should be able to find it. These early music things, they're done with incredible talent and skill and recorded with such care and lovingness, but often on smaller labels or independent labels. If they're on major labels, they go out of print really fast. If they're on smaller labels, they go out of business really fast. You want to be able to find it, but one way or another, and whichever one you get your hands on, please do give some serious consideration to hearing this piece by Dowland, because it is a masterpiece, a major, major masterpiece. And there isn't so much instrumental music from the early 1600s that we actually get a chance to hear. I mean, in just a couple of years, remember, Monteverdi was going to write Orfeo, and the Baroque period would be upon us. So this is one of those. It's a summation piece, if you know what I mean. It encapsulates a world of music that most of us don't know, don't have the time or the patience to explore in depth. It's hard to, because it's hard to find recordings of all of it. It's just a wonderful, wonderful way to give yourself a beautiful sense of period and beautiful musical experience. I mean, that's the important thing, right? I mean, it's just a tremendous, tremendous work by a great composer who most people don't think of terribly much, right? We're not sort of into lute songs unless we hang out at like Renaissance fairs and things. And I can go back now and play with my cow magnets and really enjoy Lachrimae. It's a beautiful, beautiful work. It deserves your attention, and it's just another reason to keep on listening. So thank you, folks. Take care.